And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard, RJ Eskow, and everybody in the media is talking about Scott Walker as a first-rank, top-tier Republican presidential candidate. There is a story about Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, that people are not talking about, except our next guest. They should be talking about it in the media. Our next guest is going to tell us more about it. Mary Bottari is the deputy director of the Center for Media and Democracy. If you don't know their work, you should. And she contributes to their PR Watch program, which can be found at prwatch.org. It's not a broadcast program. It is a written program, prwatch.org. And Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, I actually find this story kind of mind-blowing. I'm looking at it now. $600,000 spent to demote the Chief Justice as a criminal probe of the Walker campaign looms, and the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce trying to strip the Chief Justice of her title. What's all this about? What's the background? Why should this story matter?
Well, it's a complicated story that the national press is not paying attention to. I mean, the fact of the matter is that since his first day in office in January of 2011, Scott Walker has been under criminal investigation from the Milwaukee District Attorney. There's been two separate investigations involving two separate matters, but both of them are linked to campaign finance abuses. And now he's running for a candidate as the presidential level, and he's continuing to ignore and violate campaign laws. There was a complaint filed against him this week that he hasn't set up his political action committee in the way it should have been set up. But what we're talking about right now is that this criminal investigation in the state of Wisconsin is coming before our Supreme Court on April 17th and April 20th. And right before then, on April 7th, the state's largest a business lobby is fighting a battle on the ballot to demote our liberal Chief Justice.
So
let me just unbelievable.
Let me just jump in. I'm trying to translate this story to national terms. The conservatives are always seeing conspiracies even when they're not there. But here, I'm trying to picture. So the national equivalent, as far as I can tell, would be if Barack Obama had a history of breaking campaign finance laws, and there was about to be a hearing in front of the Supreme Court involving his breaking of campaign laws, and suddenly the United States Chamber of Commerce started spending millions of dollars to get John Roberts removed from the position of Chief Justice. Is that sort of the equivalent?
That's right, but that would be assuming the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was on Barack Obama's side. So here in Wisconsin, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, and they are a very powerful institution. They have helped elect Scott Walker. They've helped elect a Republican Assembly. They've helped elect a Republican Senate. Their friends are in charge of two bodies. There is one impediment to their agenda, and it's a super smart, totally cool, very petite Supreme Court Justice named Shirley Abrahamson, and she is a leader of the liberal wing of the court. And in Wisconsin, in our Constitution, for 126 years, it's the senior justice who leads the court. And so even though she's a liberal, she leads the court. And in that role, she controls the budget, she controls scheduling, she controls a lot of things. She can't dictate her own rulings. She has to deal with the conservative majority. But she does have a lot of power and influence. And just as a criminal investigation involving Scott Walker and Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce one of the issues at stake is the election spending of Wisconsin manufacturers and commerce. Just as this is coming before the court, there will be a vote on the ballot April 7th to change the way the Chief Justice is selected. And on April 8th, if it passes, on April 8th, Shirley Abramson will no longer be our Supreme Court Justice.
Well, who will
Chief
be?
Justice. Well, they'll elect someone else. They're switching it from a seniority system to an election system.
Well, who
now,
votes?
This sounds very reasonable.
Who votes?
Who votes? The judges will vote.
The judges. So okay.
I know this is complicated, but the voters will vote on the ballot on April 7th on a very low turnout election. The voters will vote whether or not to change the Wisconsin Constitution.
So it's a given that I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's a given that Shirley Abramson would lose because she is a liberal. A majority of the court is conservative. So it is assumed that if voters pass this by referendum, then the next day a majority, that conservative majority, will replace Shirley Abramson with a conservative, right?
That is exactly right. It's downright Machiavellian. It's a little hard to explain, and that's why it hasn't gotten the national news attention it deserves. You know, we've selected our chief justices this way for 126 years. It hasn't become a really important issue until the GOP decided that they cannot continue to have this super smart liberal woman in charge of the court. And so they have passed a constitutional amendment in the legislature that is now going before the voters that will change the way the selection is handled. And of course, there's no grassroots demand for this, so the only people spending money to pass this referendum is Wisconsin manufacturers and commerce. And the reason I wrote the article, which people can find at prwatch.org, is because their ad campaign says it's a sign of monarchy when people are chosen by seniority. And it was so outrageous and absurd. This, in Wisconsin, we vote for our chief justices. I mean, we vote and elect our Supreme Court justices. That is not true in every state. And this woman has stood in front of the voters 3 times, and the last time they voted for her as chief justice. And now Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce wants to get rid of her, and so they're spending $600,000 in the last week of a race where other people aren't really in the field. There's a small amount of money being spent on the side of the Chief Justice. And I'm not optimistic about what's going to happen.
No, it doesn't sound good. We're talking with Mary Bottari of the Center for Media and Democracy and about the special election being called to unseat the liberal chief justice there. Now, first of all, they don't know how monarchies work because monarchies don't work on seniority. Haven't they ever heard of the boy king, for example? But secondly, and more to the point, I guess let's talk a little bit, Mary, about the backstory here, which is Scott Walker. Now, you said something striking early in our conversation, which is you said that Scott Walker, leading Republican president, I'm not saying he's in the lead, but one of the leading Republican candidates, has been accused. I can't remember your exact words.
He's been under criminal investigation.
Under criminal investigation. That was your word. Now,
yes.
Now, the mainstream media may have a hard time explaining how the chief justice is picked in Wisconsin. I don't think they have a hard time writing the words under criminal investigation. So one, tell us about that, and two, maybe we can take a minute briefly speculate about why they're not covering it. But first, what criminal investigation?
Okay, so before he was elected governor in 2010, Scott Walker was the Milwaukee County executive, the top county officer in Milwaukee County. He was running for governor, and he and his staff were up to a whole bunch of interesting things. First of all, his staff set up a secret Wi-Fi system in his county executive's office, where they communicated with the campaign, and they campaigned, looking for money, planning fundraisers, those kinds of things, while being paid on the county payroll. That is illegal in Wisconsin. It was a 2-year investigation. 6 people went to jail. So these are 6 Walker staff and associates, 2 of whom went to jail for campaign finance violations. In fact, last week, one of the defendants reported for jail. Okay? And that investigation was closed. Scott Walker was not charged. The district attorney said he brought all the charges that the evidence could support, and that investigation was closed. And then another one was opened because right around that time, Wisconsin had the governor and the lieutenant governor and 9 senators up for recall. So there was this huge, you remember this time period, 2011, 2012, huge uproar because of Walker's anti-union Act 10 measure. And there were big street protests, and 100,000 people surrounded the Capitol, on and on. Then there was a struggle for the control of the state Senate and all these recalls. 1 million recall signatures were filed against the governor, and many tens of thousands more against other legislative officers. And during that time period, Team Walker freaked out, and they got together, and the prosecutors allege that they started coordinating with an independent expenditure group called Wisconsin Club for Growth. And that Wisconsin Club for Growth took and accepted millions and millions of dollars secretly and shuffled that money to all sorts of players, including Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. And that money was all spent in a coordinated campaign overseen by Scott Walker's top campaign person, RJ Johnson.
Which would be a crime?
And in Wisconsin, campaign committees are not supposed to coordinate with supposedly independent expenditure groups.
Now, Mary, is that a crime?
Independent means independent. In
now,
Wisconsin,
Mary,
it is a crime.
It is a crime. Okay. That's not just something you get a fine for.
Criminal investigation, a pending criminal investigation against Friends of Scott Walker and these money groups. And
so the short version,
the matter coming before the Supreme Court on April 17th. That is the matter coming before the court.
So and the short version is that this guy's under criminal investigation for what sounds to a non-Wisconsinite's ears like something very much like the Nixon 1972 election campaign, very Nixonian kind of story you're telling here. So here you've got a guy who's close. Some of his closest aides have gone to jail. Some of his operation is currently under criminal investigation. Now, you and I both write, and while we both understand that the chief, and they're trying to get the Chief Justice out of her position right before this comes before the court. Now, you and I both write, so we do know that it's complicated to tell the story of the Chief Justice and how they're picked and all that stuff. But it ain't that complicated if you write for the Washington Post or Politico or you broadcast on ABC News or anywhere else to say this guy and his team are under criminal investigation. See how easy that was. Why aren't they doing that?
I have no idea. I literally have no idea. Part of the reason is that some of the targets of the investigation, including Wisconsin Club for Growth, has gone absolutely ballistic and filed lawsuit after lawsuit. They've sued the prosecutors, for heaven's sakes. They filed lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit trying to shut this thing down. And so I think some reporters are a little bit nervous talking about this. But it's also true that it's early. In a sense, it's a little bit early days. We want. I think as he does better and better on the campaign trail, if he does better and better on the campaign trail, more and more scrutiny will come to this issue. Michael Isikoff, a veteran journalist, did do a piece on the John Doe, and the New York Times editorial board did do a piece on the John Doe, and as far as I know, those are the only 2 national pieces that have been done in a very long time.
Well, who knows? Maybe this will work out so that Scott Walker will become the Republican nominee, and then this case will blow up. That would be interesting. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks, Mary Bottari, Deputy Director of the, now I'm blanking on the word, the Center for Media and Democracy. I knew it was the something. I know your guys work well. I recommend that everybody follow prwatch.org. And Mary Bottari, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.